Hi everybody, my name's Peter and I'm talking to you today about the group mini project that I performed for the Cognition in the Human Brain module. The experimental paradigm that we investigated was the queued task switching paradigm. Tying your shoes, greeting a friend, drinking a cup of coffee. You perform hundreds of small tasks every day. At a cognitive level, each task has a set of processes associated with it and stored in memory. These are called task sets. When we switch between tasks, what we're really doing is switching between task sets, like changing gears when driving. This ability is associated with executive functions and intelligent behaviour. There are various iterations of the task switching paradigm employed in cognition research. Generally, all involve familiarising participants with two or more tasks, then giving them a series of trials where the task may or may not be switched between trials. The reaction time of participants' responses to task stimuli are recorded. Previous research with this paradigm has revealed that switching tasks frequently slows down reaction time, inducing a so-called switch cost. How the switch cost occurs at a cognitive level is a central question in task switching research. One of the best understood reasons is task set reconfiguration. This means that when we switch between tasks, we need to both activate the new task set and inhibit the old one. This reconfiguration uses up time and therefore slows responses and increases the likelihood of error. In our queued task switching study, participants were presented with two tasks, a shape task and a colour task, both with congruent and incongruent stimuli. Participants were also given cues before each trial in the tasks, which indicated if the next task would be shape or colour. In total, 30 participants performed 10 practice trials and 50 experimental trials each. In the shape task, participants had to press N on a keyboard when they saw a square, or B when they saw a circle. And in the colour task, they had to press N when they saw a blue shape, or B when they saw a yellow shape. A further layer of complexity was created by the congruency of the stimuli in the two tasks. Congruent stimuli are those that have a combination of shape and colour that require pressing the same button in the two tasks. So that would be yellow circles and blue squares. Overall, participants faced 4 combinations of experimental stimuli. One was switch tasks plus congruent stimuli, switch tasks plus incongruent stimuli, non-switch tasks plus congruent stimuli, and non-switch tasks plus incongruent stimuli. Based on previous research, we formulated 2 quite open-ended hypotheses. The first one was that reaction times will be significantly different between the switching and non-switching conditions for both the congruent and the incongruent stimuli. And the second was that reaction times will be significantly different between incongruent switching data compared to congruent switching data. So what did we find? Well, if we begin by just comparing the mean reaction times for different task conditions, these suggested that switch tasks were slower than non-switch tasks for both congruent and incongruent stimuli. So the mean on the left here is higher than its counterpart on the right. That's for these two means circled in red and these two means circled in blue. And also that stimuli incongruency appeared to increase reaction time, particularly when tasks were switched. So by that we mean when tasks were switched, these two means circled in green, you can see that the incongruent task has a higher reaction time, a longer reaction time than the congruent task. And likewise for these two means for the non-switch tasks, except they're quite a bit closer. So in order to actually test for the significance of the effects of switching incongruency on reaction time, we performed a two-way within subjects ANOVA followed by post-hoc t-tests. The ANOVA used 2 categorical independent variables. One was the switch condition of tasks and the second was the congruency condition of task stimuli. So the continuous dependent variable was reaction time in milliseconds. In the ANOVA table shown, the high F values and small p values in all 3 rows show that reaction time was significantly affected by a switch condition, that's the top row, and stimuli congruence, that's the middle row. And there was also a significant interaction between those 2 independent variables, and that's the bottom row. Overall, switch condition had a more significant effect than the congruence condition, and that's just indicated by the larger F and P values for IV1 versus IV2. So However, as we know, ANOVA is an omnibus test, so we did need to perform post-hoc pairwise comparisons in order to reveal the finer details of the effects of switching and congruence on reaction time. So just moving on to the post-hoc pairwise t-tests, we're returning to the table here that shows the mean reaction times, but this time we're actually using t-test to test for significant differences between the various pairs of reaction times that we discussed on the previous slide. So in the first t-test, we were comparing the differences between switched and non-switched tasks with congruent or incongruent stimuli. And what that shows is that tasks with congruent stimuli, that's these two means circled in red, were significantly different. So i.e. the switched tasks were significantly longer than the non-switched tasks in terms of reaction time. And likewise for the incongruent tasks as well, so that's just telling us that switching is having a significant effect on reaction time, and that's regardless of the stimuli congruency. So moving on to pairwise test 2, that compared the difference between the means of tasks with congruent and incongruent stimuli for both for when those tasks were switched and when those tasks were not switched. And what that tells us is that switched tasks were significantly slower when the tasks were incongruent. That's these two means on the left here circled in green. So it's quite obvious really that you've got the big 650 there compared to the 637. So the incongruent tasks seem to be quite a bit slower. The non-switched tasks were not significantly different between congruent and incongruent stimuli. So that's just telling us that stimuli incongruency can significantly slow reaction time, but only in switched tasks. So it's kind of dependent on the switch condition really. So moving on to the discussion then, we can conclude that the two hypotheses were confirmed, but as I mentioned earlier, they were a little bit open-ended. So we can now strengthen the precision of those statements. So if you recall, hypothesis 1 was that reaction times will be significantly different between switching and non-switching conditions for tasks with congruent and incongruent stimuli. And what that really means is that there will be a switch cost, and that's likely caused by task set reconfiguration. We now know that switching does slow down reaction time, as has been shown in many other studies, and that that's independent of stimuli congruency. Secondly, the second hypothesis was that reaction times will be different between incongruent switching data compared to congruent switching data. And what that really means is that the incongruency of stimuli will slow down reaction time. And we now know that that does occur, but that's conditional. That really depends on whether or not tasks are switched. We also saw that overall, switching has a stronger effect on reaction time than stimuli incongruency. Now there are some limitations to our work. The most notable is that participants only had 2000 milliseconds or 2 seconds to respond to task stimuli. So they sometimes missed out on actually providing an answer, or they provided an incorrect answer. And the methodology of our task didn't include timed out and incorrect responses. So it may have been slightly underrepresentative of certain responses for that reason. So that's something that I would suggest we amend in future. Finally then, there are some exciting areas for future research using the task switching paradigm. Perhaps the most interesting is in the idea of improving understanding of the neurobiology behind task performance. For example, it's recently been demonstrated that different groups of neurons are involved in processing shape and colour information. Since we know that task sets are stored in memory, perhaps incoming information from task stimuli is processed by these different groups of neurons, and their activity, their output, is perhaps shaped and coordinated by the task set memory. So there may be an interesting interaction between the memory system and the perceptual system. That's something I think would be really interesting to investigate in future. So these are my references. I would just like to thank my group members, Catherine, Jed, Eva and Niall. They were absolutely brilliant. It was a really good project, and I'd like to thank you for listening. Thanks a lot.